This is the YouTube channel for Open Doors Metropolitan Community Church in Seoul, Korea. We're glad you're here. We're a community seeking to live out the radically inclusive love of Jesus Christ. We are affiliated with the Progressive Christian Alliance and Metropolitan Community Churches. Please join us now in listening to excerpts from the service held on Sunday, September 6th, 2015. The 14th Sunday after Pentecost, and the first Sunday in creation. A little background on this season. The idea of a season of creation was first practiced within some Protestant churches in the 1960s and 70s. The idea fell out of favor for a while, but was revived with the interest in environmental concerns in the 1990s. It is now a season of 5 Sundays in September and October, culminating in the weekend closest to the festival of Francis of Assisi. So a series of services were held during September at ODMCC with the theme Lessons from Creation. The service for the first Sunday focuses on diversity, and the preacher is Craig Bartlett. We also celebrated the Eucharist, known to some of you as the Lord's Supper or Holy Communion, at this service. If you're so moved, you may legitimately celebrate Eucharist yourself or with a group, following the prayers and ceremony here. Within the Metropolitan Community Churches, any baptized person is allowed to preside at a Eucharistic celebration.
Let's pray. Our Creator and Parent, you are as far away as the stars, yet you are as close to us as our breath. Entice us into living in harmony with you, your planet, and each other. Teach us to stay in community with others so that we may stay in community with you. For in so doing, we find our true happiness in you, through you, and for you.
Amen.
If we could have someone to help us with the first reading, please.
First reading is from Proverbs chapter 22, verses 1 to 2, 8 to 9, and 22 to 23. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. Whoever sows injustice will reap calamity, and the rod of anger will fail. Those who are generous are blessed, for they share their bread with the poor. Do not rob the poor because they are poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord pleads their cause, and despoils of life those who despoil them.
Do we have someone who would be willing to read the second reading?
Okay, I'll read it. Thank you. James 2, 1 to 10 and 12. My brothers and sisters, do you with your acts of favoritism really believe in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ? For if a person with gold rings and in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and if a poor person in dirty clothes also comes in, and if you take notice of the one wearing the fine clothes and say, have a seat here, please, while to the one who is poor you say, stand there, or sit at my feet, have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brothers and sisters, has not God chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom that he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not they who drag you into court? Is it not they who blaspheme the excellent name that was invoked over you? You do well if you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. For whoever keeps the whole law but falls in one point has become accountable for all of it. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged by the law of liberty.
The Gospel comes from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 7, reading from the 24th to the 30th verses. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. In preparing for today, which is something I started doing 3 weeks ago, also known as how I spent my summer staycation, I started by looking at all the various alternatives for creation season readings, because I thought that this was an appropriate thing to do, and various churches, various denominations have developed their own sets of readings which they recommend to their congregations for this time. But when I read the options within the Revised Common Lectionary, I found that for the first 3 Sundays at least, I could use at least some of the readings to begin fashioning a series which I'm going to call Lessons from Creation. Now, I don't know how long this series is going to last, because I'm only prepared up to the 20th at the moment. So things might change. But for now, at least, I'd like to focus on the first lesson from creation that I found by considering the reasons and by considering the readings, and I'd like us to reflect on the lesson of diversity. Now, it's really a no-brainer, isn't it? If one looks at the variety of the flora and the fauna around us, even within our urban environment, we realize that the diversity from nature is the greatest reminder we have of how precious life on this planet is. Even if we look at how different species of animals have evolved on different continents, each suited to its local environment, we can see how diversity is a necessary result or a necessary part of the evolutionary process. Now, for some, this works against the idea of a creator God, referring to this stuff called evolution. However, I would submit that for those among us who do not rely on fixed certitudes, who do not experience a conflict between religion and science, who see the place for different types of understanding of the universe around us and the planet we're on, I would suggest that from that perspective, our response is, or can be, or perhaps even should be, to be lost in the words of the hymn writer Isaac Watts, to be lost in wonder, love, and praise. We who experience divinity in the diversity of creation find ourselves in the presence of what we might call creativity God. A favorite phrase of Rex Hunt, a minister in the Uniting Church in Australia that Daniel and I, we're certainly familiar with his work, aren't we? Yeah. Now, I'll let you know a little secret. When I first wrote that last sentence, I wrote down the second last sentence, I think. No, the last sentence. I said, "We who see evidence of divinity." And I thought, no, I'm going to change that to experience, because we're not trying to build up an academic argument, are we? We're talking about a different type of knowing, based on intuition and sensing. One based on being open to the inner stirrings of our imaginations. And that's not wrong or incomplete. It's just different. But how often is diversity being denied in our modern neoliberal, neoconservative, whatever the heck they want to call it these days, corporate and capital-driven world? We see it all around us. A person hoping to become President of the United States, hoping to become the nominee from his political party, a former governor and a so-called good Catholic. Gee, I wonder who I'm talking about. Criticizes the Pope for focusing on environmental concerns and saying that, he should just focus on helping people become better people. Explain the difference, please? In my native country, Canada, government scientists are becoming so frustrated with being prevented from presenting their research findings because quite often they conflict with the talking points of the government of our day. And it's gotten so bad that the union representing them has decided to break with the tradition of neutrality and is openly advocating for voters to vote the Conservative Party out of government in our next federal election, which is happening in 8 weeks. And in this country, we see government and associated agencies unwilling to acknowledge diversity and sexuality. They appoint blatantly anti-LGBT persons to the Human Rights Commission, and they publish new sex education guidelines which not only avoid discussions on sexual orientation and gender identity, they even avoid discussions on sex. Words that I'm sure kids already know. They circumlocute. They dance around them. They don't come out and say words like porn or masturbation. And even more disturbingly, they reinforce the traditional sexual roles of men and women. And who cannot be moved in the light of the pictures that we've seen this week from the beaches of Turkey, of how serious the refugee crisis has become in countries like Syria, and looking at the responses of the prime ministers of Hungary and the UK and Canada, and just hearing how absolutely inadequate those responses are. And the fact is, there are faith groups, there are community groups that are ready and willing to help. And they're saying, make the paperwork less complex. You can do it. We did it in the late 70s for the boat people. We did it in the early 70s for refugees from Uganda. We just opened our doors and said, yes, we're going to help you. Come in, we're going to help you integrate. And that doesn't seem to be happening now. And in Hungary and the UK, it seems like the only way that governments are willing to change their policies and bring people in is when people start jumping up and down and saying, for God's sake, do something. And in my country, our Prime Minister, who's looking for re-election now, says, well, we'll do something more, but you got to vote us back in first. Against all these things, as I read these options for our readings today, the ones we heard, I experienced a kind of moment of grace, because when I read these readings, I don't know about you, but to me, all of these readings scream out diversity, inclusion. Whether it's from Proverbs, talking about how important it is to remember that both rich and poor are children of the same God. Or if it's the letter of James, who is, the writer here seems to be employing elements of the style of writing known as wisdom literature, talking about a community which seems to be going through some kind of tribulation, if not some outright persecution. He asks the community to which he's writing quite explicitly, do you think favoring the rich in your assemblies is going to make things any easier for you? No, it won't. The writer needs to remind them that it is in the poor, the least of the community, that God is truly present. And finally, our gospel lesson for today is the story of Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman. Now, there is a thread within biblical scholarship which argues with some success, in my opinion, that this particular story reflects more the missionary concerns of the early church than with an actual historical event in the life of Jesus. There's more of a concern with increasing the mission of the church, not only to those within the fold of Israel, but to those without. However, there is another strain which says that there is probably some kind of historical core to the story. Even in the voting of the Jesus Seminar, if you're familiar with that, the consensus of the scholars was that that there was probably some kind of historical core to it. But regardless of what position you might take on this, we do have to deal with the fact that in this story, Jesus uses an ethnic slur. A slur which was commonly accepted and acceptable for use by Jews against Gentiles in that time. This woman was a Gentile speaking directly to a man, and there's no mention in the text if there was some kind of male minder or some man accompanying her in any way, which would cast greater aspersions to what kind of woman she was. yet she had the temerity to talk back. We don't like it when people talk back and don't accept their place in the world. Whether it's a person pleading that Black Lives Matter, or if it's a group protesting the strong-arm tactics of a national government, seeking to remove LGBT-friendly language from equality legislation, or those daring to point out the hypocrisy of the U.S. divesting from coal shortly after they approved the permits for the drilling of oil in Alaska. The powers of our age don't like it when people talk back. And so part of that moment of grace for me in dealing with all of these readings, especially the Gospel, was that just as diversity in creation allows for difference among plants and animals, and that this is good, we need to remember that diversity of people and places and experiences and situations in our lives is the way it is meant to be, and that this is good and necessary. Just as a little illustration of this, there was an article published in the journal Nature which found that writing teams for research articles, scientific research articles, in which there was ethnic diversity among the co-authors, these types of papers tended to have, these types of groups tended to have articles published in higher prestige journals, and that these articles were cited in other work more often than those which appeared to be ethnically homogeneous, ethnically the same. Go figure. The other moment of grace for me in my preparation for this day was discovering that the climax of the season of creation is intended to be the first Sunday of October, which this year happens to fall on October 4th, which just happens to be the feast day of Francis of Assisi. I thought, how much more appropriate can you get? So I was doing some reading on Francis, and I looked at the steps which have been identified in his spiritual journey. Now I'm just doing a brief sketch here, and I'm going to go back and refer to various elements of this in future sermons. But it's believed that Francis came to the point in his journey where he began to experience that the Christ figure, the Anointed One, the Messiah, the God the Son, however you want to call it, is integrally bound up within the Godhead. And that this serves as the center of creation. And so then, if the Christ figure, which has been made manifest in the person of Jesus, is the center of creation, then God's glory, and subsequently the glory of the Christ, can be found in all of God's creatures. And if this is the case, then it's our calling to treat all creatures with respect and with selfless love. And it's in this vein that someone like Francis was able to write the Canticle to Brother Sun. But he found this not only in his relationships with the creatures of nature, calling them brother and sister, he also found them in his dealings with other people. And I didn't realize this. Apparently, I think it was in 1219, Francis went to Egypt during one of the Crusades, where he met the Sultan, Malik al-Kamil. Now, most scholars agree he was hoping to convert the Sultan to Christianity, and there are others who kind of thought that he was on a semi-suicide mission as well, hoping that the Muslims would kill him so that they could make him into some kind of martyr. But the important point is, after conversing with him, it's generally agreed that Francis was genuinely impressed with this man and with the devotion of the Muslim people, and that he came away with it. He came away from this experience tending to value more the things that that Christians held in common with the people of Islam, rather than what divided them. So, as we continue to worship today, as we gather around the table, as we go into the world this week, I'll leave you with those ideas. Do we have enough diversity in our lives? Do we appreciate the diversity of plants, of animals, of people, of situations? Do we appreciate those things in our lives? And can we utilize those in order to gain a greater appreciation of where God is at work among us, within us, and beyond us? Amen. We remind you that this is God's table, not ours. It does not matter what your state of belief or non-belief is. You are welcome to partake of our community meal, our symbolic meal, in which we recall the presence of Christ with us. Christ is with us.
Now and always.
Let us lift our hearts.
We lift them to God.
Let us give thanks to our God.
It is right to give our thanks and praise.
It is right in our joy that we give such praise and thanks to you, O God, source of fertility and creativity. You shape everything, and you fill the world with what you do.
We praise you for the changing cycles of nature, for sunshine and showers, for the rich brown earth beneath us, for clouds and winds, dusk and dawn.
We also offer our praise for Jesus, your anointed one, our companion, who taught us to care for the birds of the air and the grass of the field, as a mother or father cares for a child.
So in the company of each other and in company with people throughout the world, we praise you as generations before us have praised you.
Holy, 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 God of love and might, all the universe is filled with your glory. Hosanna in the highest.
Blessed is the one who comes in the name of God. Hosanna in the highest.
We remember that night among friends, reclined at table, when Jesus again shared a meal with his friends.
Through grain and grape, bread and the fruit of the vine, and in fellowship together, Jesus spoke of his enduring love for each of them.
So we take this bread and this cup, ever mindful of the creative Spirit at work in our lives, making our living a source of renewal and hope, of promise and resurrection. Break this bread in celebration of the great truth that on this tiny planet, hurling through cold, empty space, death is made the servant of life, and out of death, life is forever resurrected.
I need a man. This cup with its fruit of the vine is a celebration that things are not always as they seem, that out of faithfulness and steadfastness, out of suffering and sorrow, may come unsought blessings. Through Christ, with Christ,
and in Christ,
in the power of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor are yours, God most holy, now and forever. Amen.
Thanks for checking this out. All are welcome to join in our worship and our ministry. We worship at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings in the Haebangchon district in Seoul. For more information about us, our location, and our ministry activities, please check out our website at www.opendooorskorea.org. We hope to see you soon.